because your foot cannot function naturally if toes are squished. We really just want you to understand how the foot works, especially its natural function based on its functional anatomy and physiology. Within the feet, you want to be sensing what's going on, not necessarily consciously always aware of what's going on, but from a subconscious point of view, your nervous system relies on that sensory input from all of those nerve endings to move appropriately. Wearing cushions on their feet, you never get the sense of the hard ground, which means you never develop the capacity to interact effectively with that hard ground. And then when you do take off your shoes, do something barefoot on hard ground, it hurts your feet because you haven't actually trained that ability to interact softly with the ground. This story of hard, flat ground being the reason our feet need cushioning and support is missing a lot of context. Welcome back to the Restore to Explore podcast with your soulmates from the Foot Collective. Here at TFC, we're on a mission to help humans restore their natural health and function from the ground up, so that we can all explore movement and life with more freedom and confidence. And in today's episode, we are diving into a topic that we have done a lot of talking about, but that we never get sick of, and that is the function of the human foot, not just as a structural base, but as a sensory organ, a load absorber, and a key part of your body's ability to adapt. This episode is taken from our foot restoration program, and throughout it, Jim and Tom, two of our educators, will break down the fundamentals of foot anatomy, natural function, and how modern footwear has compromised both. They also discuss how our squished toes limit movement, why self-regulation matters more than expert advice, and why your feet might actually be more adaptable than you think. This episode is all about empowering you to take ownership of your health from the ground up, and we hope you enjoy.
Do you want to know one of the most powerful things that you can do for your foot health today? It's changing your shoes. We are probably preaching to the converted. A lot of our listeners are probably well aware of the benefits of natural footwear, but we want to reiterate that most modern shoes are too narrow, too stiff, and too cushioned, which means they don't let your feet move the way they're designed to. That's why we're super proud to be partnering with Vivo Barefoot, one of the leaders in natural footwear globally. Vivo Barefoot makes footwear that's foot-shaped, flat, flexible, and thin enough for your feet to feel the ground beneath them. And here at TFC, we believe that's exactly what your feet need to function naturally. We've personally been wearing them for years, and we've seen firsthand how powerful this transition can be for improving our own foot strength, posture, and performance. And we're really keen for you guys to try them out too. So depending on where you're starting from, of course, this transition does need to be slow and steady. We are here to support you with the training and education that you need through that journey. But if you are ready to make the switch to shoes that support the health of your feet, instead of disrupting them, then you can head to the link in the description of this episode to explore Vivo's awesome range. Don't think Vivos are for you? Well, you can check out our footwear finder, where there's a heap of other trusted natural footwear brands from around the world with special discounts too. So all of those links are in the show notes.
Who would have thought
Feet would be a theme.
in a foot restoration program? But seriously, I know we've talked about feet before, and you've been learning about feet as we go. However, this week for this audio lesson, we want to do a deeper dive into feet, their functional anatomy. But we really just want you to understand at a high level how the foot works, and especially its natural function based on its functional anatomy and physiology. We'll also be talking about how loading and recovery of the feet influences their structure and function, how features of natural foot function can be developed or restored if they've been lost, and obviously just finalizing with our overall tips and recommendations ahead of a big week of training.
Yes.
Won't be too big, but
Yeah, well, you'll have,
you'll be learning some new exercises. Some will be fun, some will sort of potentially push your levels of comfort, and that's good.
But again, as we spoke about last week, that little exploration and confrontation should be a nice little challenge, really.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Why don't you start us off with the anatomy of the feet?
So I think, the big three numbers that get sprouted a lot that are worth remembering is your foot has 26 bones, 33 joints, and 24 muscles. Now, those 24 muscles are the muscles that are in your foot, which we call intrinsic muscles. And then you've got the extrinsic muscles, which are the ones that essentially go from your legs. So I think the calf musculature, the musculature on the front of your shin, they go down into your foot.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to that, you have over 180 ligaments across your foot. I know that to be true because I've counted them. There is a lot.
He's gone through
Yeah,
and
so-
counted it.
yeah.
How long did it take you?
I actually don't know, but it was definitely close to an hour, just to confirm.
Uh-huh.
So it was a long time. But it also has over 200,000 nerve endings. So what that means is in the foot, there's a lot of branches of nerves that go down into it to help with the musculature. But in the nerve endings part, we're talking about nerve endings that are there for different reasons. So some for pressure, some for vibration, some for light touch, some for temperature. And in totality, over 200,000, which is a lot of nerve endings.
Yeah, and that is a really key point to drive home is the feet are, yes, they're made for movement, hence all of the bones, joints, muscles, etc. However, they are also sensors, very important sensors. So you can actually think of your feet similarly to how you think of your eyes, your ears, your nose, tongue, and your hands. They're supposed to pick up a lot of sensory information, both from the environment and also from within the structure itself. So within the feet, you want to be sensing what's going on, not necessarily consciously always aware of what's going on, but from a subconscious point of view, your nervous system relies on that sensory input from all of those nerve endings to move appropriately.
Yes, and like a good way of sort of thinking about it, or even just doing it as a little demonstration for yourself. When you're in the gym or you do exercise per se, a lot of conscious thought goes into the movement. So if you're doing a bench press, a squat, shoulder lift, whatever, you're thinking about it. No one really thinks about picking up their phone, or no one thinks about like taking a step unless you're in lots of pain. Like a lot of that is just subconscious, and the way that works in your body is that those sense organs, hands, eyes, feet, all of that stuff just gets a stimulus, creates like a reaction or a reflex, and then you just move and you never think about it. And which is really cool to understand, really, because it means that your body's always trying to adapt to the world around it without you ever thinking about it, which is pretty wild because it's looking out for you.
It is, yeah. And actually, one thing that might be also worth mentioning is the fascia or the connective tissue that also links all of these structures, or the movement of the foot is fascially connected to the rest of the body, isn't it?
Also, like the nerves, as an example, most of your nerves are connective tissue, like up to 80% of them are connective tissue, or what you would call fascia. Around every muscle, there is fascia. A ligament is essentially the same stuff as fascia.
Yeah.
And then it's all connective tissue.
Yeah. By the way, fascia, like if you think about a chicken, what's the best example? Like a piece of chicken and it's got that white stuff, that film, I guess. Well, obviously there's the skin, and then there's the layer that's underneath the skin,
Which is also made of fascia.
which is also made of fat. Yeah.
It's essentially just a tissue that binds everything together.
It wraps the entire body. And so we kind of all know that the body is connected. However, it's good to visualize the fact that the movements and loads you experience at the foot will literally be transferred through that connective tissue, as in that tissue that is connecting each part of your body to the other, that there is no separation, for example, between your foot and your neck or your shoulder. No, it's all connected in some way, and therefore, like I said, the way our foot moves can affect other parts of our body.
Yeah.
So,
which really goes to show like why the foot is such a cool structure, right? Because with what it can do, where, like we said, I think it is probably its biggest thing of being a sensory sort of organ, to sense the ground, to feel the ground, to allow the reflexes and reaction. That's really key. But it also has to be able to take up a lot of shapes. And to be able to sense really well, it needs to take up a lot of shapes, which we'll touch on in like key aspects of it. And one of the points you've always touched on is, as humans, we're bipedal and we walk. And your feet need to be able to have those reflexes to make those shapes to allow you to walk over multiple different surfaces like rocks, beach, grass, sand, like whatever.
Yeah, they're made to be adaptable. And something that is interesting to think about is a quadrupedal animal, such as a horse or a dog. They have different muscular systems in their forelegs and their hind legs. One is for absorption, more for absorption of force, and the other is for propulsion of force or production of force. And so we walk on 2 legs, 2 feet. So our foot has to do both the absorption and the production of force. And that essentially is the reason for its need to change shape. Even if you're not on uneven ground, even if you're not on rocks, logs, etc., which our feet should be able to adapt to, even if you're just on flat, level ground, our feet still need to change shape to absorb force, which most people will understand as I sort of recognize the word pronation, the term pronation, and then to produce force, which would be moving in the opposite direction, called supination.
Which is like you pushing off like for a walk or for jumping or anything else.
Yeah.
And it is worth pointing out, like on the flat surface, if you take, say, the flat bitumen or the flat sort of concrete versus the flat grass, one is different to the other in terms of like firmness. So the way you interact as a human on the cement, the bitumen, is different to the way that you react on the softer ground.
Yeah.
Which goes into some like cool physics, but in reality, you interact differently without ever thinking about it. When you have shoes on, again, that changes it because you're not getting all that feedback or the potential shapes of the foot.
Yeah.
But again, any surface, you move slightly differently.
Yeah, or you should be able to move slightly differently such that you don't hurt yourself on it, on a hard surface. If you're used to walking on cushions, which most people are, based because of shoes, and people have been wearing shoes from the get-go pretty much, from a very young age, wearing cushions on their feet, you never get the sense of the hard ground, which means you never develop the capacity, or you may not develop that capacity to interact effectively with that hard ground. And then when you do take off your shoes and do something barefoot on hard ground, it hurts your feet because you haven't actually trained that ability to interact softly with the ground.
Yes.
So,
which is a very trainable skill.
Yeah.
As you witnessed when I learned how to run a half marathon barefoot.
Yeah.
On the concrete.
Yeah.
Like it just, you take a long period of time to potentially get to something like that, but it's all achievable if you just stay the course, stick true, and don't rush it.
Yeah. And that's not to say that everyone needs to run a half marathon barefoot on concrete. However, it's important to recognize that this story of hard, flat ground being the reason our feet need cushioning and support is missing a lot of context at best. Yeah. And flat out wrong at worst. Yeah. The reason most people's feet, quote unquote, need cushioning and support on hard, flat ground, like concrete or wood or tiles, is because they haven't developed that ability to interact softly on the ground. And that soft interaction with the ground is really down to how the feet change shape and also how we organize our body upstream of the feet.
Yeah, and the idea of having the ability to sense the ground or sense the environment and changing shape is what we essentially think of as key features of natural foot function, right? Which is really cool because when you think about what you've been learning already with your fundamentals, going through circulation, sensation, mobilization, coordination, integration, like that is the start to you getting that sensory feedback back and getting those shapes sort of back online if you hadn't had them for a while.
Yeah, exactly. And so what you've been exposed to already in those fundamental exercises and the warm-up that you've been doing each day has been starting to rebuild those capacities that we're talking about.
Okay.
And this week in the training, we'll be exploring more movements and exercises that just build on that load tolerance, toe splay and dexterity, toe mobility, midfoot mobility, ankle strength and mobility, and then some integration as well. The integration will come sort of more over the next few weeks through balance, squat, and ground.
It's coming.
But it is coming. And so we'll just really briefly talk through those aspects. So the load tolerance, this is something, again, if you've been wearing cushions on your feet for most of your life, which most people have, then you won't actually be able to tolerate the loads from the ground that you get. So when you walk, you're applying force into the ground. And there's Newton's law, I believe it's the second law. every action has an equal and opposite reaction.
I was going to remember. I had to say it's the second law because I can't remember which one of the
Don't quote me on it. It's going to be one of those laws. Should have looked it up. But most people are familiar with that concept of every action has an equal and opposite reaction. We mostly learn that in primary school or high school, I think, in physics.
Yeah.
So the idea is if you're applying force into the ground will apply force back to you.
Yes.
And that force is a load, and the tissues of your foot, the skin, the muscles, the nerves, the fascia,
All of it.
all of that is affected by that load. And we talk about injuries occurring when there's an imbalance between your capacity or your load-bearing capacity and the demand that's placed on your foot. So if you took a hammer and smashed your foot, that's an obvious imbalance of capacity and demand.
It would hurt probably
of
everyone.
load and capacity. You've got a huge amount of load going into one spot, and it's going to hurt, probably injure you. If you go for a walk for a kilometer on hard ground, that is like, I guess, especially if you're not interacting efficiently with the ground, like we've talked about, that's like taking a hammer and doing lots of little hits. And depending on the amount that you've done that to yourself over years, which most people is not that much, then that could contribute to pain. So we want feet that tolerate loads, basically. And another way of thinking about that is just we want to build tough feet.
Yes. And like when your feet can tolerate load, one of the ways that does that is it distributes load. And it distributes load by having different shapes. And so if your toes, as an example, can splay out, you've got this really wide base of support, which way, essentially you should have the widest bit anyway, from fifth toe to first toe, big toe to little toe. That should be the widest point. The wider that is, the more in contact with the ground the foot is, the more the load gets distributed, which essentially means that when you put any amount of force through it, like just imagine you have, say, 10 people, you're giving 10 people this amount of work versus giving the same amount of work to one person. The one person's really going to struggle to do the job of 10 people.
Yeah.
You're trying to do the same thing with your foot. So the more splay you get, the more shapes you get, the more dexterity you get to the ability to move the toes independently, somewhat like your fingers. All of those things are going to allow better load tolerance.
Yeah.
And so you can really, rather than overloading one spot, you can really bring everything up by sharing the load more equally and then just allowing time to do its thing and allowing you to toughen your feet up.
Yeah. So you toughen your feet by just gradually exposing them to more load. And the key word there is gradually. And by teaching your feet how to distribute those loads effectively and efficiently. It's probably worth just double clicking on the toe splay concept and how that affects that distribution of loads, because that might not be immediately obvious to people. Most people are aware of the arches of the feet. You've got a medial arch. Most people kind of just know about the medial, what's called the medial longitudinal arch, the arch that runs along the bottom / inside of your foot. And that's what people are referring to when they are told they've got flat feet.
Yeah.
It's like they don't have that arch.
Or they've got overpronation.
Yeah, or overpronation. There's also a lateral longitudinal arch, and there's what's called a transverse arch that runs across from your big toe to your little toe. So all of those arches are involved in the structural, essentially the foot's intrinsic structural support. And you still want to be able to change shape, but that arch helps take away the demand from the muscles.
Yes.
So if the transverse arch, and the arches all affect each other. So if you disrupt your transverse arch, the one that goes from your big toe to your little toe, by squishing your toes together in shoes, that will affect the ability of the medial arch, the one that most people are aware of and care about. That will affect its ability to maintain its structure and to to coordinate through movement.
Yes.
So toe splay, very, very important. That's why we have our toe spreaders. That's why we do a lot of exercises around widening the toes. And that's also a big reason why we recommend foot-shaped shoes. That's pretty much the reason why we recommend those foot-shaped shoes and why that's a non-negotiable, because your foot cannot function naturally if toes are squished.
And also doesn't take any time to transition from whatever shoe you're wearing to a shoe that is foot-shaped. There's no downside to doing that.
Zero downside.
So
The dexterity of the toes just relates to how well they can move independently.
which goes with toe mobility in some sense, right?
Yeah, yeah. And so the better your toes can move independently and with coordination and dexterity, the more adaptable your foot will be on the ground, especially when it comes to that more uneven ground or when you're trying to balance on things.
Yes, which then goes, I think it's worth touching on like the concept of that word pronation, which is what you were mentioning with that medial arch. It's like when that medial arch drops towards the ground, that is what we call pronation, or your foot flattening. Most people who come to us with some problem in the area been told that they overpronate, which by definition is not specifically a word, but it's something that everyone gets told.
Yeah.
And it's worth remembering that pronation is just a shape. Just like supination, which is to make the arch, is just a shape. And you go through these shapes. Everyone has different shapes, different sizes, essentially, but you want to be able to access both sides of that shape. And the better toe play, the better dexterity of the toes, the better toe mobility, the better like foot mobility in particular that you have with strength, the better you're going to get those shapes going.
Yeah, so you want to access those shapes, which is like the mobility aspect of it, like how far can you move in each direction, but you also want to control the movement in those directions.
Yes.
So that, people have been told they overpronate, and they may indeed have an issue with pronating too much, but more so it's usually an issue with not being able to go back in the opposite direction of supination, or they are pronating without much control, so that's just moving too fast in that direction and they're unable to control the amount of pronation. So that's, fortunately, again, a very trainable skill for the vast majority of
And also very important that, like, as you sort of go from toe through that midfoot, through the heel and up, like, if every piece of that is doing its job, that's when you get this really nice integration through your ankle, through your knee, through your hip. If something is not doing what it could or should be doing down low, whether it be the toe splay, whether it be the foot mobility and control, something up the chain will have to do its job.
Yeah.
And then that can lead to other problems in the knees, hips, lower back, etc.
Comes back to that analogy used, if you're on a team and one or two people aren't pulling their weight, then the rest of the people are going to have to work a lot harder and they might get overworked or burnt out. And that is where there can be an imbalance up there. So again, this comes back to the way our feet move. Like if we just cover up the dysfunction of our feet by wearing certain shoes, then those loads still have to be absorbed and distributed somewhere else. And that's where people can end up with knee pain, hip pain, back pain, etc. as a result of this dysfunction at the feet and the fact that the shoes are disrupting their natural movement patterns.
Yes.
So further up from the midfoot, obviously we've got the ankle, and the ankle strength and mobility obviously are highly tied with the function of the foot. In fact, you can really think of the foot as the foot and ankle complex because they work in such an integrated way throughout movement. But when we're talking about ankles, we're really looking at how well can you absorb force, and that relates to the dorsiflexion. As your knee comes over your toe, for example, while you're walking, that is part of the pronation movement, and is essentially it's coupled with pronation. And so if that's limited, it'll affect one, and if the other is limited, it'll affect
again. That's why you can give it as a foot and ankle complex,
Yeah.
because if there's something going on at one, something else will happen at another joint.
Yeah. So dorsiflexion is more related to the absorption of force, and then plantar flexion, which is the opposite, as though you're coming up onto your toes. Think about a calf raise, or when you're pushing off the ground while you walk. That is the opposite, and also very important, and ties in with supination of the foot.
I think that to get both of those going, like again, the words are useful to understand, but you need those shapes. You need everything happening. The more you have the shapes, the more effective your foot can be. The more effective it can be, the more efficient you'll move. And then the more efficient you'll distribute that load across, whether it's just the foot ankle complex or it's through the whole lower limb. Like the better it all works, the better everything works.
Yeah, exactly. So foot training is whole body training, basically.
It really is.
Yeah. So that is why we talk about the feet as the foundation of our body. Yes, other areas can affect your feet, and that's absolutely true. And that's why we don't just look at the feet in isolation. We also train things like your balance, your squat, your abilities on the ground, because the whole body can affect the feet. But just tying back to the purpose of the feet, which is mostly locomotion, walking, running, etc. Because our feet are the primary conduit with the ground, then the way they interact with the forces coming from the ground has a huge impact on the rest of the body.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think to what you touched on, like one of the reasons we try to go up and down the chain is, again, to just appreciate the body works as one whole unit. Just most people come to the Foot Collective because their feet hurt. And so one of the things I think it's useful for you to understand is like, that's where you often start. Like, figure out what's going on down there. Make sure it's rock solid. Make sure that your foundation is good. And then you start exploring the rest of the body.
Yeah. Yeah. Or, there may be other areas that need focus over time. And, we're absolutely open to that. It's not that we see just training the feet as the end goal. It's more the starting point. And then that can help direct you to the other areas that may need to be restored and explored.
Yes.
So in your foot training this week, you'll notice that you are going through exercises that help you access those key features of natural foot function that we've been talking about. So the sole exploration will help you build some of that load tolerance. Toe mojo will be great for your splay and mobility. The arch control relates to that ability to access and control pronation and supination. Toe extension and the calf raise relate to, again, that ability for the foot to change shape and to produce force.
You can think of the calf raise as like the start of that nice integration up the chain to like it's the foot ankle complex, but when the calf works, the calf has to work with the knee, just the way it works, whether it's just, you think knee joint, you think hamstring, you think quad, they're all working in unison. So it's the very beginning of that integration, which you're going to get in the coming weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. So this leads us to this conversation around effectiveness and efficiency. And this is something I first heard I read in a book called The Practice of Natural Movement by Erwan Le Corps. Great book. Highly recommend checking it out when you've got the time and space. It's a thick one.
It's a big book.
It's a big book, but is a really great representation of how the human body should be able to move naturally in a lot of different patterns, not just sort of walking and running, etc. So he talks about in that book effective movement and efficient movement. And I think it's good to just highlight that point. We've kind of been talking about it so far in the lesson already, but if you want to move somewhere, there's a non-effective way to do it, which is just not achieving the goal. Let's say I want to walk from A to B. I can either fail at that, either don't make it to B. I can make it to B, but in a way that is unsafe or applies extra load that is unnecessary, or I'm not managing the loads, or I can do it in a way that is that would be effective. So yes, I make it from A to B, but efficient movement is doing it in a way that evenly distributes the loads and is the safest, takes the least amount of energy to do, and feels the best. Creates the best performance.
When you said that, like simple analogies, like just you in a car. So let's say you have to carry 50 kilos from A to B. Now, if you're going to walk that distance, it's going to take you an hour. So again, can you achieve the effectiveness? But you have to carry that. Or if you got in the car, it'll take you 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Like,
still effective, but it's more efficient.
It's way more efficient to do that.
Yeah.
And it just makes everything way easier. So again, take that concept, it works in the body.
Yeah.
There's nothing different about it.
Yeah. So efficient movement is safer, has a better performance. So you're actually able to do it faster, and for longer. Feels better.
That's it. It feels more fun.
It definitely feels better. It looks better. There's indicators that you're moving efficiently and not just effectively.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's good to be able to do things effectively, but it's even better to be able to do it efficiently. And efficient movement should result in a natural context. Our movement becomes efficient as a matter of course, because we're in nature. We don't have anything that disrupts our movement efficiency. And in fact, we have to move efficiently or else we die.
Which, it's funny you say that, because like our next point is like, there's no right or wrong movement. And I think that's really keen to touch on. If you're effective getting from A to B and you've achieved the task, you've achieved the task. Is there a way to make it more efficient? Is there a way to do it in a different way? It does not make it better or worse or right or wrong. It will save you a hell of a lot of energy and probably leads to less soreness though.
Yeah, and it feels better. You perform better.
So you can think of it however you want. It's not right or wrong, but it is worth knowing that it's a nicer way to move.
Yeah, and it's usually a skill these days because we don't have constant exposure to natural inputs for our entire life. Then we tend to lose efficiency.
Yes.
We might still be effective. We might still be able to walk. We might still be able to run. We might still be able to jump. But most people aren't doing those things efficiently, which just sets them up for poorer performance and more injury risk.
Yeah.
Basically. So building the skill of efficient movement again relates to getting more sensation, more shape, more movement options, which is those shapes that we were talking about, and being able to access those effectively and efficiently throughout a range of tasks.
And we've kind of already alluded to some of this concept of effective/efficiency with when we look at what natural and unnatural inputs are. Like, I think that's a really good place to start, because if you go back in your menu and you look at the graphic, like when you look at natural inputs, they all essentially lead to both an effective and an efficient movement. All unnatural inputs, so wearing bulky shoes, not moving your foot, not exposing your body to movement, will always lead to definitely like less efficient movement. You still might be effective, but you won't be as effective. And I think it's a really good point for us to touch on. Like, people lose that effectiveness and efficiency because of what you said.
Yeah.
They're not exposing themselves to challenges. There's not enough work going through the foot or the whole body. And you kind of just lose practice.
Yeah.
Like, that's the big thing. You just haven't practiced it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of people probably perceive that they are losing effectiveness and maybe losing efficiency. They may not be thinking about it like this, but you'll often hear people say, well, I can't run anymore because I'm 50, or whatever it is. I can't balance anymore. I'm 70, I'm losing my balance. And it's really just not related to your age. Age will have an effect on your body, of course, but getting to 70 years old and not being able to stand on one leg is not because of your age. It's because you haven't practiced it.
The number of people I have in clinic, particularly of the 50 and over age bracket, of like, we'll do the balance testing. And it's like, oh, when's the last time you tried to stand on a single leg? And it's like, I don't remember.
Yeah.
And like, if you really think about it, often it's like been decades.
Yeah.
Which is, again, that makes sense. If I haven't stood on a single leg and tried to balance in decades, there is no way I'm going to be better at it after 20 years.
Yeah. Whereas if at 70, you can't stand on one leg and you practice that every day for the next 10 years and progressively make it harder and harder, you will be better at balancing at 80 than you were at 70. And you've aged 10 years, but you've gotten better at balance. Yeah. So it's just really important to highlight that point that efficient and effective movement relates to how much you practice that movement and how well you practice that movement and with what intention you practice that movement. So
yeah, I think it's good. I think it's a really good point for everyone to touch on. And like, the sort of the last thing to hit on it is like, when you are trying to be effective and efficient, you have to make sure that you're gradually loading, something we constantly speak about. Because if you are overdoing it and you then lose your effectiveness entirely to get from A to B because you've pushed it too far, that's not really matching the right amount of loading to rest that you're going to need for your body. And again, on the pathway to becoming more efficient and more effective, you just have to balance that out. Like, you listen to your body, listen to the signals from your body. So let's say it's a sore bottom of the foot. Today, I'm going to go for my walk, but it's a little bit more sore than it was yesterday. You just pushing through it will tend to end in a less effective outcome.
Yeah.
And that could make a step back. And if you keep stepping backwards, that's making you less effective, which will then make you less efficient.
Yeah. And the more efficient you get with your movement via training these natural functions of the feet, and throughout this program, improving your balance, improving your lower limb integration, the more efficient you get, the more you will be able to do those activities with less flare-ups.
Yes.
Because you're managing and distributing the loads from those activities well. And that's the whole idea. And that takes time. And it's a skill, and it takes time, consistency, takes progression, and it takes recovery as well. Yeah.
Which from a growth mindset standpoint, it's perfect though. That means there's opportunity. Like there's opportunity to redevelop or restore the natural foot function. You are not stuck in whatever position you are right now. Like you can create change.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And the change happens over time, as we said, with consistency. And you need to be looking at how you can appropriately rest and recover from the training that you're doing. So thinking, we have touched on this, but sleep is probably the most important recovery method or recovery strategy. Is how are you sleeping? Can you sleep better? I would say quality of sleep would be like the biggest one to work on. We actually have a podcast from long ago on Restore to Explore about this, but even, you could listen to that. Otherwise, there's a lot of articles. If you just Google, how can I sleep better? It's very much talked about topic these days. But the book Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker, if you want a deep dive, that would be a great one. Anything else?
No, well, I mean, I think it's just the best place to start. There's been some amendments and updates into that book about certain things, which has been good. I think the best way of looking at it is when you go to read it all, just remember that, you're awake or you're asleep. So there's the two different states, right? Yeah. That's the same as movement and rest. Like you can't have one without the other. So if you're someone who wants to be awake for 20 hours a day, good. Like that's okay. But the 4 hours is not going to be enough rest and recovery to keep pushing and burning that candle from both ends. Yeah. And so it's just as vital as you doing the exercise. Yeah. And as we know from all of the sports science, which is really cool, is like the exercise is just the stimulus. Like you need the stimulus to create change. But if you don't rest, the body won't adapt. You need the rest period to adapt. If you keep pushing and pushing and pushing, not having the right amount of food, not getting the right amount of sleep, you will never get the adaptation.
Yeah. And so you need to be sleeping enough quantity and quality. You might be sleeping 9 hours a night, but very poor quality for whatever reason. You have too much caffeine, you have all the
stressful
artificial light, etc. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into sleep. And again, frankly, it's beyond the scope of this podcast, but it's worth looking into. Nutrition, again, you need to be eating enough quantity, quality, variety of food to give your body the nutrition it needs, because you literally are what you eat, as in the food is the building blocks of all of your tissues that you are working on building and restoring. So it is the building blocks of your bones, muscles, joints, nerves, and the way they function will be influenced by your nutrition.
Yeah, you are what you eat, and you're also back to the concept of mindset. You are who you hang around. So like part of your recovery is socializing and being with people. Like that's actually quite good for your system. And if you're around people who, again, let's say are in a fixed mindset, you're not going to get the energy or growth off that. Because like sitting down, having a conversation with someone is actually you recovering. Yeah. It doesn't seem like it because I think people kind of just don't understand those broader concepts, but it's great for your like entire nervous system.
Yeah. So that's all of this is a deeper rabbit hole than we can explore in this lesson. However, it's very worth being aware that those things can influence. Again, let's come back to what we talked about last week is focus on the factors that you can control. Yeah. Don't stress about the factors that you can't control. Try not to. The other, just recovery technique that we both really like is contrast therapy. So you'll recognize this as the sort of sauna ice bath combo. However, you could do a mini version of that with your feet, and we have a bonus module on that. Yes. And that's something that you can look into. It's a really cool way to get more circulation through the feet without necessarily having to do a heap of extra exercise.
Yeah.
Let's say, because we know that movement and exercise is ideal for circulation and quite frankly mandatory for optimal circulation. However, if you're in the process of gradually exposing yourself to load and exercise, then keeping your feet still while going from cold to hot water, for example, can be a great way to promote that circulation, blood flow, without having to add more load to the system.
Yeah. Just think a couple of buckets, hot bucket, cold bucket.
Yeah.
Feet in one, feet in the other.
Don't burn and don't
freeze.
Don't freeze, yeah.
Yeah, because again, to what you said, like we both do it regularly, full ice baths, full saunas.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people who have different opinions on its utility or the science behind it. But when you just do it, it feels so good.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's the thing. And it's not tricky to do.
No,
really.
It's not tricky, and you're probably going to feel good, and it's just a great way to bring, again, more sensation and awareness to the feet. We talked about these natural inputs being frequent variable movement, and we included temperature and pressure exposure. So you're getting pressure exposure through the exercises, through the walking, etc. But the temperature exposure is another way of building more resilient, naturally functioning
And as
feet.
a sidebar to that, I actually read in a book the other day, their option for putting it into, I can't remember if it was the hot or cold, was to put stones in the bottom for that reason.
That was my idea.
Is that your idea? Yeah, the stones it with the rocks. And they put the heat. It's a great idea.
Unless you read something as well. No, actually, backs
Also in the book that I read the other day, I was telling you about the same thing. So there's a in there.
There you go.
It's pretty sick.
Yeah. So, yeah, you could have some river rocks at the bottom of your buckets, cold water, hot water. You get your temperature, your pressure exposure. I guarantee you won't regret that.
No.
It'll feel nice, and it's a great way to add to that recovery. So along the way, like we've just been talking about, you need that balance of work and recovery, basically, or exercise, loading, and rest.
Yes.
And how do you know if you don't have that balance right? Your body will tell you.
Every time.
That is how the body works. That is the purpose of these feedback systems that include pain. Your body will let you know if you've done too much and that you need to rest more.
Yes.
And if you listen to those signals and adapt what you're doing appropriately, you will get better.
Yeah.
If you ignore those signals, you will get worse. Pretty much as simple as that. It's just that it's not, the body doesn't give you exact advice on what to change or how to change it. It's something needs to change, and it's your job to play with the different variables, such as how much you're loading or how much you're resting or how you're resting or how you're loading, and seeing what happens.
Best analogy is like a baby. Babies cry.
Yeah.
Seriously, you don't always know exactly, and you would know. You don't know sometimes if the baby's crying because it's uncomfortable, it needs to go to the bathroom, it's hungry, it needs a little bit more affection. They just cry because that's their language. The body doesn't have, English language or, Mandarin or like any language. It will tell you through the sensations you get.
Yeah. And that being said, having had 2 babies, you do start to pick up on sort of the way it cries, the way they cry, and you go, I think it's this. I think we got to go to the toilet now. I think it just needs some milk now. It's not a perfect science.
No.
You're not going to get it right every time, but the more you tune into those, if you ignore the baby crying, it's going to get worse. Yeah.
And then to be honest, like that's probably the biggest tip of the week.
Yeah.
Like really to just listen to your body. Like if you need more rest, take more rest. If you feel like you're doing really well, do a little bit more. Like that's okay.
That is okay. And it's a really good point, because an online program like this inherently will be generic and general, and we can provide you guidelines on where to start, how much to do. We are intentionally conservative with that because most people tend to do too much too soon. So we'd rather start you smaller and build up gradually.
Yes.
And that is generally the safest way to go. But what we've recommended to you might be too much for you.
Which we have seen in person numerous times.
Yep. Or it might be not enough.
Yeah.
So, and the way you know is if you're feeling really good, your body is responding really well, then you can try doing a little bit more. Just be intelligent about it and don't rush into doing, 10 times the amount. You might just, instead of 1 round of your warm-up, for example, as we've talked about, you could do 2 rounds of your warm-up.
Yeah.
instead of one set of the exercises, you might go again because, hey, that's feeling really good. And then you note how you feel later on and the next day, and that gives you your feedback about how much to do next time.
Reflection is key.
Self-regulation is really the only way. And even if you're working with someone one-on-one, they can help you with that process of self-regulation. They will never be able to regulate for you.
No,
it's all on you to listen, to build that relationship with your body and its signals, and to regulate along the way. And that is a skill that will serve you for the rest of your life.
Yes. That about wraps that, really.
It does.
Yeah. Perfect.
I think maybe just a couple of things is, as you go through these exercises throughout the whole program, but especially this week, you will become more and more aware of your lack of function, realistically. First of all, you're not alone in that. Everyone going through this course has that lack of function, and that's why they're here to restore that function. That's why you are here.
That's for the foot restoration program.
But don't get overwhelmed by all of the dysfunctions or even the condition, like the pain, the painful conditions, and especially just your lack of function, because you don't have to be perfect in order to feel good and perform better, or to feel better and perform better. You just need to be on that path. So I think this is why practitioners, this is why there's a pushback against, telling people that they have dysfunctions, because it's like, well, the body doesn't have to be perfect. It can compensate. And this is what we're talking about. Yes, you can compensate and be effective, but it might not be as efficient.
Yeah.
So
it's likely you won't start out effective. You just got to be building in the right direction.
Building in the right direction. Don't get overwhelmed by the things that you can't do. As we said last week, you can't do it yet.
Yes.
Yeah. Keep up with that consistent, gradual exposure, appropriate rest and recovery.
And that's really...
And that is really it. I think we've just hammered that home enough.
To the body.
Yeah.
Listen to your body.
It's worth repeating though, because and you might even want to listen to this podcast a few times throughout the program if you need to come back to that concept of self-regulation. That being said, we will remind you each week as we go as well, because look, even I need reminders. You remind me.
And
I remind you
100%.
sometimes.
Yeah, that's teamwork.
Yeah, and so we need those reminders consistently, but it is a skill that you develop, and it's worth it.
Oh, yes.
Cool. Thanks for listening.
All right, ciao.
We'll see you next week.
Thanks for joining us on the Restore to Explore podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, the best way you can support us is by leaving a review and subscribing wherever you are catching this episode. If you want more free TFC training and education, are after some of our training tools, some natural footwear discounts, or want more specialised guidance from a trusted TFC health professional, then thefootcollective.com is the place to go. You'll find all of the helpful links in the show notes.